Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for the Broward Youth Awards Q&A. I'd like to welcome our hosts to the stage.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Broward Youth Awards 2021 Question and Answer Speaker Series. We're so excited to welcome you to today's portion of the Broward Youth Awards. Please drop your questions in the Q&A function in the Zoom at the bottom of your screen. And I would like to introduce my co-host for this evening, Diego.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Mona. I hope that you're all having a great evening, afternoon, depending on your time zone. My name is Diego Arreola Fernandez. I am also a Broward Youth alumni from 2020, which was last year, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight with you. And now I want you all to join me in welcoming this year's cohort of Broward Youth awardees to the stage. So please give a warm welcome to climate justice advocate and poet Artemisio Romero and Carver. We also invite to the stage co-founder of Start Empowerment and environmental educator Alexia Leclerc. Welcome Artemisio and Alexia. We also welcome to the stage a passionate scientist and protector of different types of ecosystems, Sonia Michalak. There you are, Sonia. We also have with us tonight, and perhaps a lot of you already know him, a transit justice advocate with Turnout for Transit, Peter Pham. Welcome, Peter. We also have the pleasure of introducing you to a scientist, educator, and environmental leader, David Baldwin. Welcome, David. And finally, the last of this year's Broward Youth awardees, an inspirational advocate and change maker, Alexandria Gordon. Welcome, everyone. We are going to proceed to the first question, but first we want to remind you of a couple of reminders, of announcements. We are going to be asking your questions tonight, so please feel free to put them in the Q&A function. And at the same time, you can show your support and your cheers for the Broward Youth awardees in the chat. But if you want to ask the questions, you can put them in the Q&A. So we're going to start with a general question that each one of these winners is going to answer. So you can all get a sense and get to know each one of them. And we're going to ask first, Artemisio, what inspires you?
Thank you for the question, Diego. I think like on a basic level, other people, to be more specific, other organizers. I think about like, I think I have a friend, one of the people who founded Yucca with me, Seneca Johnson. She's studying at Yale right now, and she's also like still in a really big leadership role at Yucca. I've been in my first semester of college, and Jesus Christ, I don't know how she's balanced it. And I'm also not at Yale, right? So it is like that is incredible to me. And even just like in protest too. I was at a protest recently, and there were way more cops than there needed to be, like an almost 2-to-1 ratio. And they show up pretty immediately and relatively aggressively to a nonviolent protest. And the girl leading the chants doesn't flinch at all. And I was scared. She didn't show if she was scared. So I was brave because she could be brave. We tend to do a lot of this organizing work. It's oppositional work. We're in conflict with institutions, with people. Righteous anger can be like a propelling force, but the anger basically as like just on its chemical nature can't last for too long. So for me, like the love of my community members is a sustainable source of inspiration. I'll pass.
Thank you so much for that, Artemisio. Now we're going to go with the same question. Alexandria, what inspires you for your work, for your advocacy?
Yeah, so I work to reduce non-essential single-use plastic consumption. And working to get rid of a material that is literally everywhere is pretty exhausting. So I think at the end of the day, what keeps me going is just hope and learning from history. I just know that we can be doing so much better as a society than where we are right now. And the thought of getting to a world that actually works for everyone is really motivating for me. The work that I'm doing right now is built on the backs of so many incredible organizers, kind of like Arte mentioned. So just seeing what they've been able to do and how successful movements prior to the one that I'm involved with have been able to be really keeps me going and inspires me a lot.
That's wonderful. And yeah, definitely, in order to achieve a great change, we need to be a community and we need to have that power together. Alexia, can we now hear from you? What inspires you?
Yeah, so I have to echo what is being already said, because I think, with an environmental justice activism and any type of activism, it's a really hard work. It's very tiring. A lot of organizers, activists are very overworked. And I think it's the little moments, the like jokes, humor, just spending time together with other organizers and seeing how much they love their community and how much they care to constantly do this is really what inspires me to keep going as well.
Thank you so much. David, you look like you want to answer now the question, so please give us your response.
Thank you very much. Two groups of people came to mind. One is this old scientist that I've worked with before who was on the Manhattan Project. She just inspired me to continue to work in science and be the change that I want to see. And the next is the scientist I currently work with, all of the young children that want to make a change and need someone to show them how, and my job is to help inspire them, and in turn they inspire me to work harder.
Thank you so much. That's definitely needed, more youth like all of you to go and inspire other youth to create a change. That's really needed. Sonia, can we go now with you? What inspires you? We can't hear you very well. Maybe you try reconnecting audio.
From a young age, I've always been very inspired by pristine ecosystems, especially aquatic ecosystems, walking in the woods and seeing, kind of everything living together in harmony. The salamanders, the snakes, all of the flora and fauna. There's something really magical about an ecosystem that has been relatively untouched by human activity, and one that is, allowed to thrive, and, where kind of all the organisms are connected to one another. And what's also very inspiring is taking someone to a place like this and seeing how they react. I love to lead guided hikes with people of all ages, and I never tire of seeing the joy and excitement on people's faces when you just see how beautiful everything is, and it's not choked out by invasive species, when the trees are allowed to grow, just the beautiful old growth forests.
That's beautiful and very powerful, because how can you protect something if you don't know it and if you don't love it, right? Okay, now we're gonna finish the same question, and then audience, we're gonna move on to more questions. Don't worry, this is so only so that you can get to know the winners. But Peter, can we now hear from you? What inspires you?
In addition to echoing what all of the other awardees have said, I think something that's really empowering in doing this type of work is that ultimately the work that we're doing will touch the lives of so many people around us, just because all of our livelihood and our world is contingent on the environment. And so when we, at least in my work with transit, I get to see its impact on every single person and the way it touches every single person, any person who uses transit or even the minds of people that you're able to at least change and convince, it is inspiring because it demonstrates the great power that we each have as individuals and the ability that we have to make a difference, especially given that we're all still just young adults who've only lived like less than a fifth of our lives, on average right now, less than a fifth, but still be able to do so much. And I think that's really inspiring. I think that especially what motivates is really motivating to keep struggling, especially when there are failures, especially when there are setbacks, and especially when things don't work out. To keep on struggling because in the end, it's those little minds and hearts that you touch and change that add up to the success at the end.
Wonderful responses. Thank you so much, everyone. Now I'm gonna pass it on again to Mona, and we're gonna go with more individual questions and perhaps to some of you. So yeah, Mona.
So the next few questions that we're going to ask, we're going to be looking from the audience to get questions. And the next few we're going to ask are just going to be more popcorn style. So whoever is moved to answer the question. The next question is, what is a challenge that you have faced in your work and how did you overcome it?
You can raise your hand. Who wants to go?
I'll just jump right in. I've told this story so many times now, it feels like I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but I think it's a kind of a fun story. So for my internship at Florida Atlantic University, my school wouldn't let me leave campus because this is back in 2019, and I had to make like a 20-minute drive to a research lab, but they wouldn't let me. And they told me that I couldn't leave campus and couldn't do this cool science that I thought was so interesting and so helpful to the world. And they said this right under a sign that said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And I found that just so a bit frustrating. So what I did, and my father can back me up on this in the chat, is he called me out sick every day so I could leave school and go to Dr. Ben Scooter's research lab. And so basically my message is to don't let people tell you can't do the things you want to do. You can bend the system a little bit and break the rules. That didn't hurt anybody. And do what you want to do. Don't let people stand in your way, especially this bureaucracy. It's not that helpful, at least in this case. So do what you want to do, make it happen. There's nothing stopping you.
So I see Arte has raised his hand. Let's move over to Arte.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is true for a lot of the other like organizers on this panel. COVID was like very hard, especially in terms of protests and like sustained grassroots pressure on a given system. We have like a very straightforward concept of what resistance looks like in the US. And typically that's a lot of people in a space agreeing about something in a direction. And you can't have a lot of people in a space when there is a plague, as there still is. And so that was really hard. Like COVID hit pretty close to when we were planning our like big action for Earth Day as Yucca. We were planning like a big march, and obviously that wasn't possible, right? Especially given the way that like COVID deaths tracked to asthma rates produced by extractive industry, right? So one of the solutions that we found, there were opportunities for like disruption, because really what we're talking about when we're talking about resistance, right? The leverage, the thing that gives us leverage to press policy as we do. When we're talking about disruption, when we're talking about resistance, we're just talking about disruption. So there were opportunities to disrupt that weren't just about having a lot of people in a given space, right? Once we came to terms with that, that's what we couldn't do. We actually, some of the like actions that I'm the most proud of happened during COVID. We found these like little like creative moments and the ways that we could like play some of the digital infrastructure off of itself as the government used it. There was one hearing, there's a process in New Mexico whereby they're trying to make rulemaking so that they can use the waste produced by fracking as a kind of water. It's carcinogenic, it's not chemically defined, but they want to use it as a kind of water, which is obviously bad because no water should be cancerous. That said, they were having hearings on this rulemaking process. And so we needed to interrupt them. We couldn't disrupt them physically. And we figured out that the Department of Environment really didn't have any way to regulate who was muted or unmuted on their Zoom calls at that point. They hadn't figured out that technology. And so it was pretty easy for us to digitally commandeer like this government process. Or another example, we were able to, during the end of the New Mexico, when Joe Biden put his ban on his fracking pause, his pause on the sale of fracking leases by the federal government, our governor asked for an exception or was preparing to ask for an exception, and she was making statements to that effect. And that would be horrible, obviously. Like the pause was not enough on its own, right? But so one of the actions that we were able to do was, in response to that, we created a fake email, fake website, and represented ourselves as like the oil and gas corporation, as in place of the oil and gas consortium, which is like a real entity in the state. And we emailed some people and we did a press release and we recorded an award show for the oil and gas consortium to award our governor with a oil and gas loyalty award for her having put the interests of oil and gas companies above the interests of New Mexicans. And as a corporation, we wanted to thank her for that. And we actually had some newspapers run with the story. People assumed it was genuine. We had press releases, we had video. We even staged a protest to the award that we had made up. And all of that was done with just some cameras and some actors, and was possible within COVID. Yeah, so there's always a solution to these things. Like protest is never one specific thing. It is by its nature disruptive. And so in that way it can be, and it almost should be anything. I'll pass it.
Thank you so much, Arte. Okay, Peter had his hand up.
What Arte did with his work so amusing. It's like that's such a cool thing to do. Like I think I should consider that in some of my work. But I do want to echo his. I think there were 3 challenges. The first being with COVID, it really does disrupt a lot of the different tools that we had before to fight, namely protests. Is that part of protesting is to demonstrate to the elected the sheer number of people who support a certain initiative. And so that wasn't really available when you're all kind of stuck in a giant Zoom call and they can easily just scroll you through like you're another person. But I think there are 2 other challenges that I have faced in that. One thing I appreciate about young environmentalists is that we have a strong vision and a strong goal. And then I think 2 challenges that I faced is now really trying to translate that into detailed policy and working within the constraints of what's at stake. And then of course the politics behind it. So starting with the policy, like one thing I really hit earlier on was just like the fact that we have a budget and that there are many competing demands. There's a lot of different jobs at stakes, that there's a lot of different people whose livelihoods are dependent on my county. And like my county is one of the largest in the state of California, and it has a budget of billions of dollars. And so we were talking, and it's allocated to a very, very fine minutia for it to work. And so really trying to think about how to translate all of this and how to make this logistically work to improve public transit when we're thinking about the long-term budget projections, when we're thinking about how much money we could possibly get from the federal and the state government, and how much we could even how can we best effectively use this funding, and how can we make that case as a policy proposal. And I think on the political side, the challenge was that we're young people now dealing with the establishment, at least in where I'm from. Politics is very much in 2 camps. You're on the business camp, which is kind of like the Republican side, and then there's the labor camp, which is kind of like the Democrat side. And so then by supporting more public transit, we kind of did unleash a lot of anger from one side that originally wrote a lot of the different budgets that the county now uses. And that's just, and that was a lot of, that required a lot of, I think, delicate maneuvering that was stressful at times, and trying to convince a lot of the elected officials who were bankrolled by these groups to at least listen and consider these different proposals. And I think that was really challenging. And of course, trying to navigate that weird two-party system dynamic and trying to function in that space, when I think as a younger, newer group, we don't exactly have the same infrastructure, we don't have the same name recognition, we don't have the same base, the same loyal base, we don't have the funding and the revenue to really propel a lot of that work. I think was really challenging, and trying to set all of that up was really challenging. But thankfully we got through it, and of course COVID did only complicate all of that, because that meant the budget was even more constrained.
You're muted, Peter.
Thank you so much, Peter. Can we hear from anyone else?
I'll just quickly add that there are a bunch of logistics issues with switching away from single-use plastics, funding, finding their replacement, distributing their replacement. But maybe something everyone here can relate to is that we're all also students and are doing this activism work on top of being a full-time student and on top of also having jobs and doing other things. So finding time management was a really big part of when I decided to do activism work as a really big part of my life. Figuring out how to manage all the other things that was going on is a challenge that I think is overlooked a lot of the time when talking about youth activists.
One thing my mom keeps saying to me when I tell her about my new projects are, make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin, because I oftentimes do and get overwhelmed, but it's always worth it.
Okay, great. I'm going to pass it over to Diego for our next question.
Yes. So this question was about setbacks and challenges. And fortunately, you are all incredibly resilient and determined. And so you overcame them, you adapted, and you kept moving forward. Now we're going to talk about something a little bit more optimistic and more fun. So we have this question, and it is about, what is your favorite part about doing activism? And I would like Sonia or Alexia to start it. So if any one of you want to start answering.
Yeah, I can jump right in if that's okay. Probably it's really hard to pick a favorite part, because I think some of my favorite things to do are probably go out and gather data out in the field. It's often something very therapeutic, and I love being able to explore ecosystems and kind of see all of the interconnecting parts inside. It's kind of like peeling back and seeing like all of the individual, almost like circuits and hardware in an ecosystem, which is something that never ceases to fascinate me. But probably also one of my favorite things is when I lead youth workshops and getting to work with other people who are oftentimes my own age, and getting to see how excited they get learning about these different organisms. And it fills me up with so much joy, because it's the same excitement that I felt when, as a young child, I would go off into the woods and be lifting logs and, hanging out by the stream and trying to lay flat and kind of peer into the water and see what's living down there. And it's just a joy that I love to pass on.
That sounds really amazing. I would say for me, it's directly working with a lot of students that I work with. So we work very closely with the teachers that teach our curriculum and our programming, but we also directly sometimes get to go in and talk with the students and present and all of that, and really seeing how they're able to connect some of their lived experience with environmental justice and kind of the terms and the vocabulary to describe these systems of oppression, and then seeing them take that knowledge and connecting them with community organizations and seeing the work they do. We've had students start their own school gardens, start extensive mutual aid programs. And it's just really inspiring to see that whole process of growth for them.
Anyone else wants to answer the same question, or should we move on to the next one? Okay, Well, thank you so much for your answers, Alexia and Sonia. I think like the summary, the conclusion is that when you are very passionate and when you love to do it, it doesn't feel like you're doing extra effort. It's just incredible. And now I'll pass it on again to Mona for the next question.
Thank you, Diego. So Arte briefly touched on this, but I thought I could ask a question that's come up in the chat, which is, how has the pandemic affected your projects?
I can jump in. So like I said, we worked with a lot of schools to implement our programs. And so with schools shutting down and going remote, that really significantly shifted everything we were doing. We had to like think of creative ways to basically revamp and like reshape our entire curriculum to be remote friendly and find different ways to like engage students and then find different ways to engage them in their community. The other thing that we really had to rethink was how we worked with schools. As we know, a lot of schools, especially in communities of color, are already underfunded. The teachers are already overworked. And so making the supporting teachers and the supporting students and their mental health and their physical health a priority of START empowerment has been really crucial, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do any of the work we do. And then the second portion is we also started working outside of formal education spaces. I think informal education spaces, especially popular education, is also equally important, especially, for other folks that might not be in the regular, school age and going to middle school or high school, et cetera. And so really seeing the power of both working within schools and outside of schools has been really powerful, but definitely a shift we had to take happen because of COVID.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexia. Can we hear from someone else?
I did some similar things to Alexia since we were both education based. All of my programs and modules had to be formatted into digital platforms, as well as getting our members to just get excited about activism again, because we were shut down. We couldn't go out and root up invasive plants, and we couldn't go out to elementary schools and like do all these fun little things and go on our trips and do the cool out in nature stuff that's just so much cooler than sitting in a classroom. And so we kind of had to like motivate them to get them happy about doing this kind of work again. And that was totally very difficult. And in my own personal research, I couldn't go into a lab anymore because I had to stay at home. There was a stay-at-home order. And that moved all of my wet lab research and germination of plants to theoretical land management practices and just theories and stuff that I couldn't really test that well. Eventually I did, and all that. But in the moment, it was a very difficult time to do the science that I really wanted to and to spread the knowledge that I wanted to. But we've gotten to the point now where things are a bit more lax, and I'm able to have all of these meetings again. I have a meeting coming up next week for a new program for restoration and research in environmental science in Florida. And I'm looking forward to it and finally getting back to work.
Excellent. Go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, if I could also add on here, I feel like, very similar to what has been said with restrictions on in-person gatherings, especially indoors. It's been hard to host seminars and teach and also attend conferences as I usually do. Also, the microbiology lab prototype I had created was pretty much ready to go. We actually had scheduled to have our first school groups come in I believe it was supposed to be in March, right when kind of the COVID started to really hit in the US. And as a result, all of that had to be kind of postponed. However, though, I did notice that I feel like there was an increased interest in a lot of the land conservation work I do. I had a lot more people coming to me showing interest in working and helping out with gathering environmental data and helping out with creating systems of trails for people to walk on and become more engaged in their local ecosystems. And during that time, and now it kind of continues as well, the conservation agency I work for with Ridgeview Conservancy, students who are very interested in helping out to get land conserved and figuring out how to create a vast network of trails that can be open to people all over the region, and also preserve a lot of very unique flora and fauna. And I kind of feel like maybe if it wasn't for COVID, people wouldn't have necessarily slowed down and noticed the beautiful ecosystems around them and how that they were directly being threatened with development plans.
Thank you so much, Sonia. So if there's no one else that wants to answer this question, I'll pass it over to Diego for the next question.
Sure. Thank you. We have a very interesting question here from an anonymous attendee, and it says, science should provide facts and rational thought, not misinformation or political views. How do you propose to accomplish this as you work to change the minds of people who disagree with you? And I would love to hear Artemisio's thoughts on this question.
Oh, I appreciate that, Diego. I mean, to be fair, I don't really consider myself, the information I share includes scientific data. I do share political views. I think that they're basic political views about how certain people shouldn't be killed. So I don't think them as like deeply biased. I think they're truths. But I also do want to say that like my expertise is not at all in like the communication of scientific material as much as it is in the communication of the moral consequences of that material. That said, I think that the question of how do you change the minds of these people who, for whatever reason, are opposed to scientific data, you could climate denialist, or opposed to the concept of like widespread human rights. You look at white supremacism in the US and its role within, for myself, you know, my struggle is mostly against the fossil fuel industry. There's a lot of white supremacism written into how we regulate that industry. And there's a lot of white supremacism written into how we perceive that industry. So how do you deal with those barriers? I don't think that most people who hold strong political ideology, especially, and I'm going to be honest with y'all, political, like conservative political ideology, I don't think the reason that people hold those beliefs is because they've been provided with so many facts that they've believed to be true. I don't think someone becomes a Trump supporter because they've just been given so much information, right? I think the reason that you have that denialism has to do with their emotional needs and them trying to achieve emotional needs or, you know, enact insecurities through ideological association, through their relationship to an idea, right? I mean, I think like when we talk about the people who are resistant to climate change, or even the idea or resistant to the idea that we can do something in pursuit of climate change, right? I talk to a lot of people and there's a conclusion of, and this is one of the main arguments I have to try to change. There's a lot of ideas that climate change is irreversible. The damage has already been done and we do not have enough time to do anything, right? That's an understandable argument. I get where that comes from. I think emotionally that comes from a sense of disempowerment. It's not practically true. We still have a lot of time to do a lot and we owe it to every single child born from this second onward to make that change happen, right? But there's an emotional truth or an emotional need that is structuring the ideology behind it. So in order to change the minds of people who disagree with you, I spend less time focused on the exact, you know, misinformation that a climate denialist is spouting, but I find that it's more useful to spend time looking at why exactly do you want to believe this thing, right? What does it offer you to be in denial of your reality? It's the same question you ask the white supremacist. Or rather, I don't really talk to those people, you don't ask them. But in my conversation with Trump supporters, I found that like, and again, not deeply voluntary conversation with Trump supporters, I found that like investigating the emotional root of political ideology is a good way to deconstruct that political ideology.
Excellent. So
wonderful.
Wonderful answer. Okay, so the next question is for Alexandria. What advice would you give a young person trying to make a change in their community?
The biggest piece of advice I can give is to find other people who also want to make a difference. And I know that might maybe seem like not a direct answer, but when I was first starting the plastics campaign at Eckerd to get Eckerd to phase out non-essential single-use plastics, I knew that that was not something I would be able to do by myself. If I just went to administration as an individual person and talked about this campaign, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. And it went so far because I had multiple people from across the Eckerd community and even the greater community in St. Petersburg supporting me and behind me. And it was really in large part because of that Eckerd was such a success. I was also able to plug into the group that I work with now, which is Florida Perk students, and get a lot of training from other organizers and activists. And because I had the support of that group, I was also 100 times more effective in the work that I was doing than if I just did it by myself. So I think that honestly, the biggest thing I can say is just start talking to other people and plugging in with other groups, using the resources that are out there, finding toolkits and manuals and anything that can support you, and learning how to be an effective organizer or learning more about the issue that you care about.
Excellent. Diego, back to you for the next question.
Yes, I would like this question to be answered to as many of you, if not everyone, but we're going to start with Peter, and do you plan to do this environmental work that you're doing as your aspired profession? I think we can't hear you.
As a career, it will be in addition to my work.
Peter, could you repeat yourself? We couldn't hear the very first part.
I said, if not as a career, it will always be part of the work that I will do. It doesn't necessarily have to be a career, but it can also be something I do on the side and on top of my other roles, yes.
What about you, Alexia?
So I actually graduated college in 2020, so I'm 21 now, and I'm a full-time environmental justice organizer.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
That's really nice to hear.
For me, I plan on staying in academia and doing environmental science research for a very long time. And I would like to have it be a part of my activism and education efforts as long as I can. So yeah, as a career.
For me, also definitely, I'm currently at Carnegie Mellon University undergrad, studying statistics and machine learning, and also water sustainability and genetics. And I really plan to use these tools to find ways to create ways to, kind of like the previous question, to really make science language the debate and find better ways to present statistics to groups of people and really convey messages of the importance of stopping climate change, not just on a global scale, but locally as well, through well-informed decisions regarding land usage and development, and also enforcing environmental regulations.
And I also plan on staying in this work, graduating in a couple months, plan on continuing organizing, and really just want to work with young people to make sure that our generation can be able to make change in any issue that we want to.
Excellent.
I've done this work for, like, when we first started the organization, I refused to pay because there were other people who needed like income more and we had a limited budget. When I took on like a full-time job and I had college to pay for, I took pay. And then I've taken other jobs in and outside of it. I've been paid to do the work. I've been paid to not do the work. It's been a career. It's been a thing that detracted from my academic career. I don't think I can exist and not be doing this stuff. Ideally, people will give me enough money for that to like pay for housing. If not, we'll figure something out. Yeah.
incredible. And please, everybody that is here in the audience tonight, keep an eye on their names and these amazing 6 leaders, because when you see them in a couple of years and they're like super successful and change makers, you can remember when you met them tonight at the Broward Youth Awards Q&A ceremony 2021. And I'll pass it on again to you, Ramona, for the next question.
Thanks, Diego. So our next question is, how do you motivate the people around you? Why don't we start with Alexia?
I would say talk to them, find out how their life is going. What are their concerns in life, right? Everyone is dealing with issues. And I found that, social justice issues connect to environmental issues and are really impacting everyone at a certain scale. And so finding what their connection is to the issue to get them passionate and to get them involved, I think is really key. So a lot of listening, especially to community members and communities of colors.
Excellent. Let's hear from some other folks.
In a lot of the educational, sorry, you can go ahead. Okay, in a lot of the educational workshops I run, when I work with people of all ages, a lot of times I like to highlight specific features of a healthy and balanced ecosystem. I really like to emphasize the point that as humans, as living organisms, we are a part of our surrounding ecosystems. We do not live like above it. We don't really live like in our own little bubble. And in order to be physically healthy ourselves, both physically and mentally, we need to make sure that our ecosystem surrounding us is healthy. And a lot of times I like to emphasize this by highlighting a specific organism and kind of saying, like, you see, this is a gorgeous salamander here, beautiful spots. This salamander and you have a lot in common. You both kind of want the same fundamental things. Both of you want healthy food to eat that will help you grow big and strong. Both of you want to have clean air, and both of you need clean water. And both of you can be protected by doing the same things, by making sure that we are, making wise decisions regarding land usage and development, and making sure that we protect the headwaters to our drinking water sources. And I find this often works by getting, really people of all ages engaged. And also people want to protect people don't really feel necessarily inclined to protect what they don't necessarily understand, and also what they're not very familiar with. So I feel like familiarizing people with how a healthy ecosystem should operate, the different organisms present, and also how to go out into your own backyard and identify certain bioindicator species. I find that also works very well to inspire people to take action.
Very similar answer to Sonia, but when I work with people of all ages, mostly with young elementary school students, and my work is a very complex, nuanced thing. And I find that putting, kind of making an analogous comparison between my work and their interests is very helpful to getting them to understand things. Because as Sonia said, when people understand things a little bit more, they care a lot more. So if someone really likes cars, I'm going to explain invasive species and ecosystem management in the sense of a car. Like us restoration ambassadors, we are the mechanics of an ecosystem. And let's say the gas pedal is the food and nutrients that a car needs. The soil is the gas. So that's just an easy comparison to get students to understand and get have a fonder appreciation for it. I find that very helpful.
The topic of climate change, and so for me, the topic I focus on in terms of radicalization and motivating people is going to be climate change, and then specifically environmental racism. So that's a depressing topic with an even more depressing topic. Climate change is a global holocaust, and environmental racism is the specific targeting in that process of Holocaust and the culmination of 400 years of genocide in various degrees. So when you're trying to motivate people in light of that, I find that a rule I try to follow is that I'm never going to tell someone that something is wrong. I'm never going to describe to someone, this violence without also giving them the tools to deal with it. Right? We can spend a lot of time like fixating over the problem. We should fixate. We should dissect it. But if I'm talking to someone and I'm like, this is what's wrong with, on this issue, right? Then I also have to say, and we're going to have a protest on this day, or we're having a community meeting right now, or this is, the change in a bill provision that would stop this altogether, right? Like introduce the issue and then also introduce a solution at the same time. Because if you're asking someone to take action, you need to do more than just vaguely gesture at what that action is. Even though that is hard, imagining the alternative is really hard. But through that constant imagining of an alternative, we will create one. Yeah. Also food. If you have food in an event, people will be there, is a reliable rule.
Excellent, Arte. I agree with you. Food makes every event more inviting, especially music too, if you hire a DJ. Okay, great. So I'm going to pass it back over to Diego for another question from our Q&A panel.
Yes, thank you so much. And I also resonate with all of your answers, and especially Artemisius about the food. That's a very powerful tool to motivate people, and especially children and young people. We're going to go now with Alexandria, and you talked about a little bit how this is overlooked and how like it's difficult for activists, especially young activists, to manage our time between like college and family and all the amazing work that you're doing. So can you talk a little bit about how, in your experience, you have managed your time, and any advice perhaps for other young activists that perhaps want to do change, but think they won't be able to find time for it?
Yes. So the biggest thing I had to do was come up with a really clear goal for myself and set a limit of what I was going to do around that. So for example, when I decided to launch the Eckerd college campaign to get the school to phase out non-essential single-use plastics, I knew that that was going to be what I worked on. And I knew that would require a lot of my time because I wanted to do something that was really big. So when I asked other young people to join my campaign, before I did that, I would plan out what I wanted them to do and talk to them about what they would want to do and what got them excited, and then have a specific ask for them based on their capacity and what they were most interested in. So if you're watching this and want to work with other young people, before asking us to do things, I would encourage you to have conversations with us and think about what our capacity is and what we're actually most passionate about. And then we can create what we do around that. I also then just was really honest with myself about what I could and couldn't commit to, but wanting to make sure that my ultimate goal of working on this really big campaign was at the top of my mind, second only to school and like my family and life things. So I think just being really honest with yourself, and that does just take practice. It took me running the campaign for months to figure out how much time I needed to plan a meeting, how much time it was going to take to have meetings with people, when I needed to allocate time to just sit and think through my campaign strategy. So just doing the work will also teach you a lot about how to time manage, but really being honest with yourself and thinking about what your goal is and working within the constraints of what you actually want to get done and when you want to get it done by.
Wonderful.
Oh, if I can, I'll also
Please,
just,
Artemisia, please go ahead.
I think that's like a really good kind of, like I want to agree with everything that was said. The other thing too, at least for me, is burnout. You're gonna hit burnout. Like it's gonna happen. Like I told myself when I first got involved, I was like, well, I'm just never gonna get burnt out. It'll just never happen to me. And now I'm like more burnt out than, like a bonfire. It's terrible. I'm so tired. But and then you have to like find ways to deal with it. But if you don't get to that point where you don't overload yourself, you don't have to like take that moment and realize that you've messed up. avoiding burnout, I think, has a lot to do with relying on other people. We are an individualist country. We have a very individualist idea of what political change means. Don't do it by yourself. You're not going to succeed if you do. You need other people. And through relying on other folks, when the time comes that you are burnt out, when it is too traumatizing, when it is too exhausting, there will be other people to do that work until you feel like you can, and then you will, and you'll take over for someone else.
Excellent.
Wonderful advice and tips that we are having here today. Audience, like, take your pencil and paper and write all these incredible tips. Next question, Mona.
So I'm looking in the Q&A here. I see someone has given a very specific question for Alex. I have a question for Alex. After Eckerd College signed the pledge, other universities across the US followed suit. How does it feel to see the impact of your work spread across the nation?
Pretty unreal. I think I mentioned this in my acceptance speech, and it's in my video for this award, that I started this work having never organized ever, and not knowing that you could be an activist full time, and not really knowing what organizing or activism could look like in my own community. So I thought I was just going to get my school to do a really cool thing. And then after that happened, I got other schools to do other really cool things. And it was really inspiring to see that. And I hope that just goes to show for a lot of other young people, you don't have to have a background in doing organizing work starting from a really young age. You can come into this at any point. It's also just really inspiring to know that there are other young people who want to do this, and Eckerd wasn't a one and done. The things that I think all 6 of us are doing in our communities are replicable across the country and can build up to make a really large nationwide movement. So anything you hear us talking about is specific to our areas, but I think can also be replicated, and is really inspiring and gives me a lot of hope to know that there's so much ability to create change. So it's just been really cool to see, and I'm really thankful for all of the other young people who followed me and worked with me on their own campaigns across the country.
Adding on to the replication of projects and everything, now that I've moved into my first year of college, I had to leave the ER ambassadors, which is who I worked with for the past 4 years. And I still want to do this same work and build upon it. And so I started a new network, the Florida Environmental Restoration Research Network, in my college campus. So it's definitely, it's not an easy thing to do to restart this whole program again, but people are always there to help you. And this climate crisis and environmental science is the people involved are so passionate. So there are always people ready to join the fight.
Excellent. So I'm going to pass it off to Diego for another question from our audience-generated chat, or our audience-generated Q&A.
Yes. So, Peter, what will be one piece of advice that you will have for young people who are just getting started as activists and leaders, perhaps about mobilizing people, about creating change, about like going for your goals and not allowing anything to stop you? Just, if you want, you can give more than one advice to all people in the audience. It's for Peter. Peter, are you there? Can you hear us?
I'm sorry, you got cut out for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, Peter. So, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to the audience, like in terms of your experience with going for your goals and achieving change and leadership?
Always remember that goal. I think no one in the work, whatever it is you're working on, there will be times when it gets really, really hard. And so always try to remember that goal. And when things get really tough, just remember that this is what you're working towards and that you're not going to get the gratification necessarily now, but it will be worth it in the end.
Thank you. Sonia, what would you add to that? Another piece of advice for young leaders that want to start or expand their advocacy?
I feel like a big piece of advice I have is really stay up to date with current events, like especially local to your community. I feel like a big thing that is very important to emphasize is although climate change is really a global issue, and global warming is a global issue, there's still climate change can still involve local things as well. For example, cutting down a forest, decreasing shade, increasing the temperature in, say, a certain neighborhood, that still is climate change. You're still altering that ecosystem. You're still altering that climate. So I think it's really important for people to keep up to date with these events and try to figure. I guess when it comes to ecosystems, every little thing is very connected to each other. From a biological and also kind of from like a mechanical standpoint, in the sense that if you cut down a tree, you have less shade, temperature increases, certain organisms that are adapted to specific temperatures can no longer live there. Now suddenly you have a loss of this organism in the food chain, other organisms are missing food. And so by kind of understanding how every little thing is interconnected and how human impact can upset these connections, I feel like that's something really important. And there's always town hearings and meetings. There's always ways, proposals for construction. And I feel like it's always important to at least try to sneak into those meetings and just try to ask questions. Because I feel like a lot of times people don't even consider the environmental effect. And something as simple as putting down an impervious surface like concrete can increase flooding, can cause rivers to flood their banks, decrease habitat for organisms, and can also wash pollutants into water supplies, like drinking water reservoirs. So I feel like those are just very important things to pay attention to.
Excellent.
Okay, so
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So we're going to come to the last question of the night. We're going to keep it light and bright. The last question is, what do you do for fun?
Who wants to go first? Just jump in.
Let's do it. I really enjoy cooking. That's what I like to do. And I find it very therapeutic to think about at the end of the day is just make a meal for people I love and for myself.
Great. Let's hear from someone else. We've got just a few minutes. I'd love it if we could hear from everyone. What do you do for fun?
I do anything outside, swimming, going on a long walk, just being outside, and which I think makes sense for the work that I do.
What about you?
Hiking's always fun. Hiking's always fun for me, and also learning languages.
Nice.
Excellent.
Recently, I've been very into like reading poetry with friends, like getting some poems I need to have like opinions on for educational purposes and going through them. And just like either the poem is amazing and so we both enjoy that, or the poem's bad and then we can both like be petty back to the poem, which is super fun. And yeah, I'm gonna go after this and like read a friend's short story, so I'm excited for that.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'd say I also really love the arts, just like painting, poetry, and also just like petting fluffy animals. I like finding like friends and people with like dogs or horses or alpacas. So yeah.
Very cool.
I love the fluffy, yes, also fluffy animals. I am super into industrial archaeology. I have these two things with me, a bottle stopper from the Victorian era and a hand-carved stone marble from the early 1900s, both of which I found not far from my university. And it's something I always love to explore, learn, read about, and teach about. And I'm also super into mermaiding, swimming in a mermaid tail.
Very cool. Wow. Okay, was that everyone? That wraps up our program for tonight. Thank you so much for all the attendees that joined us. It was wonderful to hear all of you speak on a deeper level and get to know you. I'd like to thank everyone who spoke tonight on tonight's panel, all the attendees, and I'd like to thank my co-host Diego, and we will see you next year. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Mona, and goodbye, everyone. Have a great rest of your night.
Bye.
Bye.